lets you just...
And it's recording. All right. Thank you. That's good to know. I've been doing a lot of teaching on Zoom, but it's all through a system. So this is it's set up through the school. Okay. So I'm here with, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, I am Dan Milano.
Hi, I'm Christa Starr.
Okay. And they are currently the co-producers on a big project. And I have some animation questions for them. So first off, I just want to ask something really, really basic because I don't really understand this. So I don't think most of my audience will either. There's 2D animation, there's computer generated animation, there's 3D animation, there's cell animation, there's all of these different things. So
yes.
While not going back to the beginning of Disney when they invented deep canvas technology or anything, but just focusing on now, what are the big delineations? What are the big kinds of animation? And what separates them? So, for instance, what's the difference between 3D and computer generated?
You want to take that, Christa? A lot of these are subheadings.
Yeah, computer generated is sort of a catch-all term for anything that's done on the computer. So you can have a 2D looking animation that's computer generated. You can also have a 3D looking. 3D means sort of photo volumetric, realistic looking. The only real difference is like how their output. A 2D is a flat image, 3D is a full volume, and then there's hybrid, which is a combination of the two. Dan, do you want to add anything to my?
Yeah, I would say that it's best to think of things in terms of, because the technology is so vast, you can theoretically create 2D animation with a computer, and you can create 3D animation using stop motion puppetry or really strong 3D perspective. So the best way to put it is you just start with, I would say 2D and CG. 2D is typically a flat image drawn by the human hand in some form. CG, or computer graphic, is made within a computer and is very much digitally sculpted in 3D space simulated by a computer. And those computer generated images then are used as the assets or the subjects in an animation piece. Yeah. And then there are all these subtle degrees between the two, because, for example, Glitch Techs was a show we did as a 2-dimensional series, and it combined hand-drawn and computer animation, because although it was hand-drawn in a computer. And we also, yes, it was computer assisted, I guess is what I should say. Even storyboarding and design very often at this point is done on a computer but it's still people holding styluses and tablets and things like that. So the cleanest answer is to say you have computer generated, and then you have like tactile hand-drawn animation.
One of my favorite examples of a computer generated show that looks like it's done by hand is South Park, because it's done in 3D. They do the entire show in a 3D program, but then output it to look like paper cutouts, because that's what their original short was made of.
Right, so there's an interesting example. This is a 3D program that's capable of making sculpted 3D images, but paper is a 3-dimensional object. So they used that program to create flat pieces that stacked on top of one another so as to create and simulate the look of construction paper. So if you look at the pilot for South Park, I believe that is done 2D with construction paper cutouts and cameras filming them. And then as the series developed, it became a CG simulation of that. In my opinion, I think our opinion, both are extremely valid. None invalidates the other. They take amazing talent and wizardry. There is nothing a computer can automatically do to simulate, the human need for animation, but it can just make things much easier to handle.
Well, I mean, to this day, I can't think of anything that tops the opening scene in Bambi when they first debuted the deep canvas technique.
It is
a beautiful scene.
Absolutely gorgeous. And now, theoretically, someone could produce a similar image one would argue if the computers existed at the time, that's what would have been used, and it would still require the imitation of life, which defines animation, and an animator to interpret what that is. And, I think we have a romanticism for, including me, for paper, pen, and brush and ink, because there is a way they interact with the paper that's kind of uncanny to us, and special. So I don't want to take that away. But it's arguable that, all these styles can be done in a myriad of ways. And usually what's best is, if you think of it like music, you just want to combine all forms of instrumentation to make whatever sounds good to your ear.
That's a really great concept, especially as a segue, because I was going to ask you, at first I always try to think of my questions and get the right question going in my head, and that can take a long time. And I was going to ask, what's the trend in animation? What's the animation industry moving towards? And then I began to think about everything I've seen over the past few decades. And I kind of changed the question to, then is there a trend? Is there a trend? Is the animation industry moving towards one technology, or is it just they're constantly adding new tools to the toolbox?
I would say it's definitely adding more tools to the toolbox, because I think there's so much more that computer renderings are capable of now than they were 20 years ago. But also there's still so much storytelling you can do with traditional 2D animation. I think it's just more tools mean more stories, and more stories means better animation. You're going to get more product, you're going to get more voices, you're going to get more ideas. And with each of those comes a new way of showing people how to tell a story.
It's true, and there's so many new formats now. Most studios are pretty open, I think, to projects setting individual looks, with some exceptions. There are some studios that maybe have a brand and they like everything to look somewhat similar. I think for a while, DreamWorks kind of had a sameness to some of their productions intentionally, and a pipeline in which they did things.
Blue Sky had the blue sky look, and
Okay,
but that's opening up now too. And one of the series I would point to is Beastars on Netflix, which is produced by Orange Studios, and it's an amazing anime. It looks 2D, but it's entirely a CG series, strong CG elements, and it's just shaded to look 2D, and it's gorgeous. And it has so many interesting sequences because of its ability to do that.
It is. The only reason I know about that is the clips were so gorgeous. These random clips with really weird cutting story element wise, they're showing up on YouTube. I'm like, why are they showing this clip? Then I'm like, oh, eye candy.
It's a great show, and it's really, really well developed characters. And then
they even did their title sequence as a stop motion.
Yeah,
which is so good.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah. And so it's like, man, how cool! They're just digging in. Look at the Spider-Verse.
It's everything.
They there's just so many interesting interpretations now, and I think the gloves are kind of off.
The color scheme for Spider-Verse dang near gave me an aneurysm, though.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so and then I just have a really specific question that I'd like to address to you two as just experts in the field. With any new kind of, I'm fairly on the spectrum, and any new kind of animation, I've taught myself that I'm going to hate it for the first 48 hours after I see it. Any change to something so profoundly visual just grates across my brain. So I always withhold my judgment for 48 hours on any visual
Interesting,
change.
because it's a sensory reaction.
All my relatives know I will not give any opinion on the new haircut for 48 hours. They need not expect it. And when Ruby came out, it looked like something I'd be interested in, but the animation style just set my brain on edge. And I'm like, okay, give it the 48 hours, but it didn't go away. I'm like, okay, give it a few weeks. One's taking longer, but I have never been able, I've tried to watch episodes of Ruby, and it's like, it's psychologically painful on a level that I usually only get from really bad writing.
Krista, have you seen Ruby at all?
No, I haven't.
I've only seen the first few episodes because so many people I really respect are telling me like you gotta check out Ruby, as well as fans of the show, and I always of Glitch Text, and I always try to take that very seriously. And I have to say, I have had a similar reaction in that it looks very much like almost PlayStation 1 cutscene. Like it looks very machinima, like video game CG.
But
and
I've dealt with low quality CG before, and it's never given me that.
I don't know. I mean, there's nothing to say about it except that that is just our response to someone's art and its opinion, and there's nothing more to it. But that there is a unique look
technically?
There.
Do you know what that style is?
I can't say.
It, so I don't know.
To me, it's a lack of gosh. You know, I should bring it up to look at it. I want to say this with a disclaimer so I don't offend anyone. But my memory is that there was kind of a lack of shading or motion blur.
Yes,
and
it's
so
like
it had a very flat look.
It's definitely giving that blocks of color feeling.
Yeah. And when I see stuff like that, I usually find it pretty interesting. It's something I wanted to revisit and sort of push through because of all the recommendations I've gotten, and the hopes that story will kick in and take over. But yeah, it is. I don't know what it's like. Well, as individuals, we think we know what a hamburger tastes like, and we want to bite into it and taste it. And when it tastes a little different, sometimes we say, "Ooh, that's delightful. What's that?" And other times we go, well, "That's not a hamburger." So,
well, it's sort of like what you were saying before, Dan, about the music. Not every style of music is to everyone's taste.
Yeah, same.
My friends like certain types of music that I can't listen to, and vice versa.
Yeah, the only thing I could compare it to was when there was an anime, Vision of Escaflowne. It was big in the late 90s. And the animation style was just different from every other anime I'd ever seen. And it was kind of always represented in the fandom by these just long pointy noses. And that was really jarring at first, but eventually you did get used to it.
I'm going back and learning so much about this because I started in live action and then have become more like a student of animation as I've begun working in animation more and producing for it. So I'm revisiting a lot of these series now. And one that was fascinating to me was Land of the Lustrous, which is also done by Orange Studios, which was like a gorgeous CG series that I'd never quite seen the style of before. That was an example where I thought it was beautiful, but it didn't look like at all what I expected. And anime certainly has had huge changes over the decades in how it's interpreted.
What did we just watch, Dan, that had in the animation they left some of the guidelines in during the animation?
Oh yeah, that was crazy. Was it Wolfwalkers?
Yes, it was Wolfwalkers. That was so cool.
Yeah,
I don't know
when the wolves are fighting and stuff.
Yeah, they would leave guidelines in different areas and scenes, so you were always conscious that it was in animation, that somebody made this. It was really neat. It was
like they didn't turn off the drafting layer.
They didn't erase their lines, their guidelines. It was really cool.
Yeah, have you ever seen The Secret of Kells?
Oh,
no, I've heard such good things though.
I haven't.
When I saw the clips for Wolfwalkers, it just screamed Secret of Kells to me.
Yes, the eyes.
And the hair, right? And that half-finished animation style.
I love stuff like that. That's when you start to go online and Google and find out. Like recently I was watching My Hero Academia and I was like, I feel like this is maybe the same people who did Full Metal Alchemist. It's just certain things that were ringing for me. And then so I went online and went on Wikipedia and I was like, oh, yep, it was. Like it's fun when
that's also how Dan really types.
Yeah. Like a Muppet.
I still have to peek for half the punctuation. So, on a purely self-indulgent note, do you guys read much in the way of manga? I know you've got to be really busy, but do you have any time for any of the new manga that come out, or are you much interested in manga before it gets animated?
I would say Dan is more than I am. I generally tend to spend my time, my free time, reading with my daughter, who loves all sorts of books but likes mommy to read with her. So right now I'm in the middle of Warrior Cats.
Oh, how far into Warrior Cats?
I just finished book 6. So
okay. Wait, which one was that?
That was the end of the first arc.
So Firestar's chieftain now?
Yeah, Firestar, yep, and he defeats Scourge, I believe is his name.
Yeah,
That's our daughter's
the
new
one with the
obsession.
artificially lengthened claws.
Yeah.
I had a huge warrior cat's face.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, so Dan, have
I
you seen the hottest new manga, Kaiju number 8, breaking all the records?
I haven't seen
Ooh.
it yet, but it's been referred to me many times. I'm reading Witch Hat Atelier, I don't know how to pronounce it, which was recommended by a friend. And then when I saw Beastars and liked it so much, I had picked up the Beastars manga. But no, like, see, my fear of manga is that the shelf space it takes up is so intense, and I have so many hobbies.
Look
Board
right
games,
behind us.
I
If you can
never
see,
tried
look
to
at
collect
my
my manga. I donated it to the library as soon as I was finished with it.
Oh, that's
It's
good of
just-
you.
Yeah, that's smart, because
A lot of the kids in my area did, because the mass.
I'm
Yeah,
afraid of the
so
deep
much stuff.
dive. But you know what I would love would be actually like larger format too, because part of me likes to sort of like be able to trace over.
Yeah, I got
images.
the Shonen Jump app about a couple
that's cool.
years ago, and one thing is you get the real full effect of the 2-page spreads if you read it on your computer. But anyway,
Oh,
Kaiju
see,
number
maybe I'll
8.
do that. Kaiju
It's-
number 8, I'm writing down.
It's not completely irrelevant to our discussion. The art is amazing. I mean, it's one of those points where I'm regretting that I didn't take more art classes, because I don't know why it's so good, and my brain wants to know why it's so good. And there's one character in particular, his role in the series is to be very mobile. His benefit to the team is his speed and agility. And I noticed right off the bat, there was something different about him whenever he was on screen, as it were, because I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but all of his action scenes were drawn just slightly differently. And I swear, when you look at the page, it looks like he's moving. It's like your brain just naturally fills in the 2 seconds before and the 2 seconds after.
That's cool. I'm sure
really
that's
neat.
true. So much of what's great about animation is like what isn't drawn and what you do fill in. But you know what? I think that you would probably benefit from speaking to a designer, maybe even one of our, from our team, because those really are also matters of design. Like, Eric Robles had to explain to me a little bit the appeal of the glitch text characters, or at least the intent of the appeal, where he said that they were more humanistic, in body type. So there was a reality to them. But if you notice, they do have anime attributes. Their eyes are a little larger, the heads are a little larger. And very specifically, instead of flat cutouts or angular parts, everything is very round and fluid, and things are tapered to imply that they are three-dimensional characters. They have a roundness to the edges, and that those things are all a matter of creating like an appeal. So we got a lot of great feedback on the design of those characters, and it was interesting to me to learn why. And he said, yeah, it's really a combination of styles, like trying to do something that's you typically see as grounded character work, not too stylized, but then these very specifically chosen stylized aspects that just kind of as particularly eyes that just sort of play on likability. So a designer can probably go into more about why we tend to feel the way we feel.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it is that inexplicable thing that's hard to put your finger on.
And there was
just part of the magic.
One thing, I started reading this when chapter 8 came out. It's only up to chapter 32, so we're like a year or two out from an anime. But it's all the books, the manga books they've released. They've already outsold everything else. Book 1 broke a record. Book 2 looks like it's going to break another record. But
wow,
the thing that kept reoccurring to my brain when I'm reading this is the main character is what I imagine 5 would be in his mid-30s.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that I definitely want to see.
Yes.
What about poor Me-K.O? Where's Me-K.O?
Psychologically, oh, that's believe me, you'll come across that character too.
Oh, okay, good.
If Me-K.O had a whole lot less humility. But yeah, he's just this very empathetic but incredibly fierce character.
I like that.
And very, very well. The creators are kind of a mystery, maybe not deliberately, but just because they're so new on the scene that we haven't had time to translate their bios yet. But I'm honestly not sure of anything about the creators, and I'm not even going to try pronouncing their names. But yeah,
I'll look it all up. That's
I
why
really
love,
kept thinking that Dan is going to like this.
I appreciate that. I'll take your recommendation to heart and check it out immediately. I really like Midoriya in Full Metal. Not Full Metal Alchemist. My Hero Academia. He's got very high five energy, just like somebody who has very strong moral compass and thinks of others and a great deal of empathy. It's such a likable character. Christa's background is very much in CG and CG physics. So her experience was really all on the computer animated side for many years.
True.
And it looks like our new project will be very steeped in computer generated. So that's,
yeah. I spent a lot of time looking at lighting and lighting choices, special effects, things like that, because that's where my background lies. I'm like, oh, look at how they simulated the sunlight. Oh, look at that water. Oh, that's
Okay,
most
so-
beautiful water.
Oh yeah, the water in Raya and the Last Dragon.
The Last Dragon,
is,
yeah,
like,
beautiful water. Oh,
unbelievable.
I wanted to drink that water. It was so beautiful.
So this brings me to a question, and I'm going to be very careful with how I phrase this because nobody needs to get in trouble. In glitch text, there were a couple of flying beasts. Novak's books. So theoretically, if you were given Barbara Novak's books, which are all about dragons, she hypothesized, the main problem with hypothetical dragons is, of course, wing surface ratio.
Mhm.
There is no way that any of the traditional Western or Eastern dragons could actually fly. And by the time you've taken it back to a pterodactyl, I love them, but they're really dumb looking. I mean, especially they're pelicans.
Yes.
It's like doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo,
Those
doo-doo.
long heads,
Yeah.
like the
And
vulture
so
and Looney Tunes.
theoretically, if you were doing animation of Novak's dragons, as someone who studies CGI, the engineering of CGI, how do you make a dragon flight look real?
Well, define
Because
real.
the human brain knows that certain things should not be moving through the air.
I have a very specific problem with one movie where it's got rocks that float, but the water still falls off the side. And I'm like, if gravity's not affecting the rock, why is it affecting the water? And the water's still
Yeah,
coming
pretty
down.
much
Rocks are
every
made of
movie that does
unobtainium.
the floating islands
I'm like,
tries to
"Why?"
give you that waterfall.
Oh,
It's like you
it's just
can't
like,
have both.
Can't have both. Can't have both. Just one or the other. Because if the water was heavy enough to fall off the side, it would probably bring that whole rock down anyway. So the real, I believe, issue with the physics of CG is there is always a suspension of disbelief when it comes to animation. There's a degree to which your storytelling sort of has to compensate for the I guess in Star Trek they call it the technobabble, like those areas between what's real physics and what's sort of needed to tell the story. And as long as you're telling your story, I think that a lot of the physics errors do wind up being forgiven. We try to make things realistic by, say, grounding them in real world things that people have seen that are sort of similar. Like I know that a lot of the motions of the dragons and how to train your dragon are based on different animals. Something that we're going to be doing with our next project is looking at real animal anatomy and looking at how they compensate for things, how bats fly, how other creatures that may have a strange like wingspan compared to their body weight, like a hummingbird might fly, things like that. So you do look into the real physics. You do try to ground it
I can
in
actually
something.
hook you up there.
Oh yeah?
My academic advisor, he was the guy who completely redefined how we understand hummingbird flight back
Ooh.
in 07.
Oh
Well,
my
that
gosh,
sounds
that's amazing.
lovely. Yes, I would love
Don
to.
Powers, I used to go out and help him catch hummingbirds. He'd take them and he had a wind tunnel and he'd coat the inside of the wind tunnel with oil. And that special oil it was like the stuff they put in your veins when they want to scan you. It's like it picks up the camera. And then he trains the hummingbirds to fly in the tunnel.
Oh my gosh.
It's actually fairly easy to train them. You just got to be patient and understand that you're dealing with hummingbird. but then he tracks the oil droplets, and it was believed that they flew more like insects than birds because they are the only bird that can truly hover. And but it turns out that they're actually, because an insect gets 50% of its lift from the uplift and 50% from the downlift, because they can rotate their wings basically at the equivalent of the shoulder. But a bird gets your average bird gets 0 lift from the downdraft. So when they're pulling their wings back up from the uplift, when they're pulling their wings back up, they're falling, and so they have to compensate for that with downstroke. That's why most birds can't hover. A hummingbird can rotate its wings, but only about half of what an insect can. So a hummingbird gets 75% of their lift from the down sweep and 25% from the up sweep, which is infinitely more than any other bird.
Oh yeah.
But it's still only about half of what a bee gets.
So I'm glad you bring this up, because we are on a project, and people can Google it and know what that project is, that involves creatures like these, like dragons, and so part of the job is to say, well, how are we going to interpret this? And you look at what we're used to seeing, and what we like about that, what we don't like. Most importantly is to serve the material and the characters themselves and bring them to life in the way that the author intended.
And also, I want to say one other thing, which is that a great way to do this too is to look at what other shows have done and where people have complained about the physics. Like I was talking about the technobabble in Star Trek, and that reminds me of people used to not like the fact that ships in Star Trek would bank in space, because you wouldn't. And then Battlestar realized that, and their ships don't bank in space. They turn and then go the other direction because there's no air to bank through. So that's another great way of.
That's a fantastic example.
Yeah. So what's a good example of a cinematic dragon that bugged people?
Sometimes it's from the limitations of the effects, because there's so many things that have dragons that just like maybe didn't have the benefit of.
And also, I might not want to answer this question because I don't want to make.
You know what? Let's say dinosaurs instead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
let's say dinosaurs.
Stop motion dinosaurs in early movies were done out of. There was a lack of science to really understand how dinosaurs moved, right? Actually, yes. Let's talk about Jurassic Park. So they knew they didn't want to do the typical stop motion. They wanted to update to what science had caught up to about dinosaurs and how they moved and how they would be represented. And yet we give you the raptors, which they knew were not to scale of what raptors should have been. But the raptors needed to serve a narrative purpose in that story.
It needed to be emotionally intimidating, and it's really hard when you're the size of a corgi.
Yes, yeah. and the book set that expectation. So as an adaptation of the book, where the raptors were particularly dangerous, there were Compsognathus that were smaller chicken-sized things. So the raptors had to be different. Similarly, in adapting it to a film, something that wasn't even in the book was how to make the Dilophosaurus different, and the idea of giving it a frill that it never had, but that it and a rattlesnake sound. But these things are arguably so effective and cinematic and wonderful, that although a dinosaur expert in the audience is going, well, that wasn't the case, they're also saying, but I'm having a great time. The conceit is that these are genetically altered dinosaurs, and this movie is getting so much right that has never been gotten right before, that I'm on board. And that's kind of the job, to say, I need to delight and entertain an audience. My dinosaurs have to be distinctive, interesting silhouettes, interesting behaviors that set them apart. I want to ground it as much as possible in reality, because that's part of what we're bringing to this project. And yet at the same time, our job is to entertain and delight as well. And so you and the people that you work with have to kind of juggle those things together. And that's what we want to do in the book we're adapting, and working with our team and with our author to go through these 3 components, really. There's like the what if phase, where you just have fun and think of fanciful, cool ideas based on what the books establish. And then you have it's like the pie in the sky. And then there's the should we discussion of, what's to be gained by these choices. Is it practical?
And also, once you build your world, being consistent within it helps a lot too.
Yes.
You know, once you're in that world, if your character can lift a bus, but later can't lift a rock, you've done something wrong. You know, you just got to keep it consistent.
And you know what's crazy?
Those
Within
are
my own
no-nos.
stories, I've consistently found that binding myself to the original limitations that I've set, going back and rereading what I've already created, yes, it's limiting, but it also has given me some of the best elements of the stories that I've developed, because you feel like you're in a real world and the next part of the creation just follows logically. Well, if this, then that.
Yep.
And it's like, it's less binding and more supportive.
The enemy of art being the absence of limitation, you know, pretty much every time it's wonderful to work within, you know, certain rules.
So let me throw you a hypothetical out here. Back in, 2006, I was in the bush, Alaska as a dispatcher for a little airport. And that's the only time I spent any amount of time playing the PS2, because, you know, your options are limited there. And there was only one game I liked. It was called Dragon Rage or Rage of Dragons or something. And the culmination of the game was that you got to rescue a clutch of baby dragons.
Aww.
And they were the cutest thing. And a couple of kids in the little village came up, and I had to re-win the final level a couple times because they all wanted to see the baby dragon.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
Yeah, so when you're making an adult reptilian species like this, I'm imagining you want it to be dignified and kind of noble, you know, it's like our, you know, friend the T-Rex or something. But when baby alligators are adorable, they are in my opinion, one of the most adorable creatures. Baby lizards, baby snakes, they've got, you know, the neonatal proportion, and the way they move is just, it's different from mammals. It's different from puppies, but it's distinctly, it triggers all of those neonatal instincts in me. So if you were given a clutch of baby dragons to animate, how would you go about that?
Ooh,
Especially if you had a chance for them to do something other than just sit and bob their heads in the nest like they did in the 2004 PS2 game.
I think one of the things that I would especially love to see in that clutch is how they sit still for a very long time, and then they move so much faster than you expect them to. Right? Like, like our bearded dragon when he was a little tyke. Like, he would just run so fast, you'd be like, I cannot catch this thing. Oh my gosh.
Having a bearded dragon that we're in love with is amazing, because it does constantly remind you of the way the instinctual habits that these creatures have, young and old, but particularly in the young. And I think it's one of the things that we would really strive to do is say, look, you know, we're not worried about appeal right away, because as you say, a young baby crocodile is adorable. So now you imbue that with some personality. You don't need to turn the crank on the Disney meter all the way to 200 and suddenly put a fully human persona in, where now this is like a little child actor mugging for the camera with an alligator, you know, body. What you want to do is keep it rooted in animal and make sure that those head flicks and those quick speed movements are there, so you never forget, you know, it's a believable animal, but you're also trying to imbue some performance in it as well that is, like, for lack of a better term, human, but we really want to find like where the two meet. So design wise and in performance, we want to take like sort of a Jurassic Park approach to realism, like, wow, I really believe in this dinosaur or this dragon. At the same time, our dinosaurs hypothetically need to also emote, but who's to say that, you know, that T-Rex couldn't just look down and start talking. You know, that's where the power of animation comes in, and design, because you might want to give some features or movable joints to that dinosaur to allow it like a slightly wider range of expression. But if you go too far, it stops being a dinosaur. And that is quite literally the fun of working with artists and engineers and designers and finding that together. You know,
good team with a bunch of good ideas, and it's so much fun. That part of the process, the early part of the animation process, where nothing's written down yet. Nothing's animated, nothing's rendered, nothing's on paper. And you're all just like, what if? What if it worked like this? What if we take as a given that, this world is not Earth, and then maybe the physics work different and they can do this? And what if?
And you work with drafts people whose job it is to interpret these ideas to early designs, see how we react to them, maybe try making models of them and testing them and seeing how they move. And those are the wonderful, early tests that lead to you making the decisions that sort of solidify the design rules of the show.
And that's especially fun too, because almost everybody, if you give somebody, you say, draw a lizard, and you don't put anything else on it, they will come back. 20 different people will have 20 different versions of a lizard that look nothing like each other. And that's really fun too, seeing what people think of when they hear that word, what it looks like to them, what appeals to you in that and what doesn't. It's just so, it's a joyous process.
And that's just anatomy and appearance. So now let's say, well, we're not just designing any old T-Rex. This is the way we would talk about an actor or a character. We'd say, well, this is Luke Skywalker. He's a young farm boy from Tatooine. He never knew his father or his mother. He's
because he's a T-Rex, he has tiny little arms.
So you talk about a character. So you say, well, this is a T-Rex who was raised in, this environment with this kind of parentage and is this sort of personality, and that's going to affect the way it moves, the way it looks, the sparkle in its eye, the way it's animated. They're not all going to run, roar, and move the same, because personality is a huge factor. With there's such individuality in human beings, and so we would want to put that into dragons. And that's where you're not just designing creatures; you're creating characters and performances. So that really informs a lot of it.
The book from author Betty Adams, Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, is a humorous look at human behavior through the eyes of aliens. This book is arranged in separate reports or essays, documenting the experiences with humanity through the lens of the aliens who have to interact with them. This anthology of short stories and vignettes from alien points of view highlights some of humanity's quirks we can all relate to. Author Betty Adams captures how strange and interesting humans can really be. This is a fun collection of stories you will really get a kick out of. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, from author Betty Adams. Order your copy right now on Amazon.